Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Hang On to Your Shirt Tales from the Chasing Tales series, Book 2 by C.A. King, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Secretary of Defense Petra Dillon paced the hallway, waiting for the last of those summoned to arrive. This meeting was crucial to the overall protection of the country, especially if new terrorist threats were connected to old ones. Her thoughts raced a mile a minute, mulling over the information she had to share. "You'll wear the carpet thin if you keep that up, Madam Secretary." "General Taggart," Petra exclaimed. "It's about time you arrived. The others are already waiting. I trust you have had time to review the information we sent." "It's good to see you, too, and I have," he answered, taking her hand between his in a friendly gesture. "I'm not sure I understand why we are so interested in a chunk of land the military sold off years ago, though some things are better left undisturbed, if you know what I mean. Come inside and I'll explain everything I know." A swipe of her security badge opened the wooden door beside them. "After you. Please have a seat." She motioned toward the sole empty chair left up at the table, beside her own. Taggart eyed the group of high-ranking politicians and combat officers. "This is a rather impressive gathering of the minds for merely discussing a couple of hikers and an accident on privately owned lands. What's this really about?" "I trust I don't need to rehash old stories about Area 59, Petra said, "or the reason why these particular lands were sold off when they were." "I think you can spare us the history lesson," Taggart agreed. "I try to avoid bringing up the horrors of the past before lunch." "Our team of scientists have ascertained that the latest terrorist attack could have only originated from 4 different and strategically placed regions," Petra explained. "And Area 59 is one of them?" Taggart questioned. His brows arched, forming a letter M on his forehead. "Isn't that a shock?" Petra shook her head, trying to avoid smiling at the comment. "It only stands to reason that our military first acquired the property for its location," she continued. "Too bad no one thought of that when they disposed of it. There is a high probability that the airborne drug was released there. We've had eyes in the sky and ears on the ground since." The president's personal liaison, Todd Monroe, cleared his throat. "And all you managed to come up with is 2 trespassers and an accident victim? That doesn't seem very impressive." It might appear that way on the surface," Petra argued. "The circumstances are unusual, however." "Explain," Monroe ordered. Petra held back the urge to roll her eyes. She didn't care who Todd Monroe was representing. If he kept his mouth shut, he'd have the answers he was demanding. The 2 hikers called in an accident they stumbled upon. "Am I to understand we have people watching the area, and the only reason we know about this incident is because the hikers called us?" Monroe interrupted. "That's even less impressive." "It's a rather large area," Petra replied. "Yes or no, Secretary?" Monroe ordered. "Yes," Petra replied in a huff. "Todd, if I may offer my input," Taggart said. "I think the skills our forces have in gathering information are probably the least of our concerns at the moment. Perhaps we can allow Madam Secretary the opportunity to explain exactly why we were brought together on this fine day." Petra offered a grateful glance in the general's direction. "Thank you," she said. "Very well," Monroe added, tossing his pen on the table and slouching back. "We'll leave inadequacies to a later date. Continue telling us how a pair of hikers are a threat to national security." "It isn't the hikers so much that brings the concern, although they aren't beyond suspicion as of yet. The area, after all, is an odd place to choose for a leisurely stroll," Petra advised. "Then why are we here?" Monroe complained. "It's what the pair found," Petra replied. "They stumbled upon an accident that took place some time ago. A vehicle fell from the dirt road, ending up at the bottom of the ravine." "Did it survive?" Monroe scoffed, rolling his eyes. No, Petra snapped. It was completely mangled and burnt. Although why anyone was driving around harsh territory in an unregistered off-road vehicle is curious. What it was even more disturbing was the man they found. Still alive. Who is he? The general questioned. We don't know, Petra admitted. He's in a coma. Dental records came up blank. He has no fingerprints or other identifiable marks. His face was badly injured in the crash. Not even facial reconstruction specialists can piece it back together. And I assume he wasn't carrying any identification, Monroe said. Petra chuckled. No, she answered. We did check that first. He wasn't carrying anything other than a coin. It doesn't appear to be anything out of the ordinary, though. Haven't you tested it? Monroe exclaimed. We would if we could pry it from his grip, Petra answered. The man simply won't let go. Do you believe this man was one of the ones responsible for the peace drug? Taggart questioned. It's a distinct possibility, Petra replied. He was in the right place at the right time. Unfortunately, we can't question him as of yet. We have a team of doctors working around the clock. Hopefully they can help him recover. Bring back a man from the brink of death to execute him for the crimes. The general scoffed. Some tactics never change. Why change what works? Monroe replied. The hikers. I trust they are still in our custody. Of course, Petra answered. I want a full interrogation conducted, Monroe demanded. Use whatever means necessary. Are you suggesting we torture the couple? The general complained. Is that really necessary for being good Samaritans? Those responsible for the peace drug have clearly stated they have no plans to hurt anyone, Monroe advised. Bleeding heart types wouldn't be able to leave an injured man to die. If you ask me, the hikers are the more likely culprits in this scenario. Understood, Petra said. Keep my office apprised of any updates, Monroe added. I want to know when the man wakes up and the second anyone squeals. The edge of his folder banged against the table, straightening the papers within. If you are through, I have other pressing affairs to attend to. Petra nodded. Thank you for your time. No need for thanks, Monroe scoffed. I didn't have a choice in the matter. There's an election year coming up after all. He exited the room without another word. An entourage of officials followed like ducklings chasing after their mother. Petra exchanged glances with the only other person left in the room, the general. His eyes laughed, forming wrinkles in the corners before he snorted a hearty chuckle. That man has far too many pencils up his butt. You shouldn't say such things, Petra replied, stifling her own laughter. If he heard you, he could strip those bars off your uniform. I'm too old to worry about snarky young politicians like him. Taggart waved his hand in front of his face. With what the world is coming to, early retirement doesn't sound so awful. We need you, General, Petra suggested. I know I do. You keep me sane at these meetings. Besides, you are the closest thing we have to a specialist when it comes to Area 59. That's one title I prefer not to have, Taggart admitted. Has anyone contacted the property owner yet? Petra sighed. It's a numbered company owned by a long line of other numbered companies. It's going to take some time to sort out what's what. Whoever bought the place didn't want anyone to know. That makes sense, given the nature of what went on there, Taggart mumbled. I can't think of many people who would want to be associated with the place. Did it really happen? Petra questioned. Was our government involved in those experiments? Do you really want an answer to that? The general side-eyed his friend. I didn't think so. Placing his hat on his head, he clicked his heels together. I bid you good day, Madam Secretary. I'll begin my own investigations as well. I trust you'll keep me in the loop, Petra called after him. General Taggart merely waved his hand above his head and kept walking. There were some things he never intended to disclose. Chapter 2. Perfection didn't happen often. To be exact, it only happened once a month, and even when the beams weren't normally as pure as they were that evening. A full moon glowing in all its glory was a shifter's salvation. George lay back, a slight incline making for a comfy rest. A long blade of grass twirled in his mouth, soaking in the bright silver rays right along with him. Most people didn't notice the subtle changes the celestial orb went through, including shifters. Perhaps it was a next generation thing. Whatever the reason behind it, George knew. He could feel the differences. They affected him. Every little detail, from the small abnormalities in the sphere to his ever so slight color changes. George exhaled slowly, closing his eyes to the sound of his own breath and heartbeat tangoing in the spotlight. The moment was pure bliss, his inner beast soothed, the baby in the treetop rocking gently. Nothing was stirring enough to break the bough supporting him that night. Nothing except a shadow. His upper lips raised, throat emitting a low growl. Clouds during the day were pretty and white, but at night they ruined everything. He raised one hand, shooing the wisps from the sky. Instead, the dark gray pockets came to a standstill, mocking him from above. Top and bottom teeth clamped together, huffs and puffs barely able to escape from behind them. Perspiration beaded on his forehead, his inner temperature rising. If he were a thermometer, the top would have already blown right off. Eyelids blinked furiously in a last-ditch effort to regain even a smidgen of control. Then a calmness fell over him once again. The lullaby reset right before the cradle fell. The clouds moved on, choosing not to tempt his fiery ire. That was a wise decision on their part. "What are you doing?" Eliza asked, plopping down on the tiny hill beside him uninvited. "Enjoying the moonlight," George replied, his breath still raspy. It would take a few minutes for his metabolism to stabilize. "What brings you out of your room? I thought life revolved around that actor you like." "Shut up," Eliza exclaimed. "I needed to get away from them." Her ice blue eyes rolled as she glanced back at the house with contempt. "Them who?" George asked, propping himself up on his elbows. He cocked his head, following their line of sight. "The other kids?" "No!" Eliza shrieked. "Don't play dumb. You know who. Tails and Brody." Her top lip turned up, tongue sticking out. "They're making me sick with the Tails has to stay cool. Tails had to eat this. Tails needs her rest." "So what's the big deal?" George asked, adding a shoulder shrug. "They are trying to have a litter. Brody says it isn't easy for our kind to have kids. It's like everything else, we have to jump through hoops." "Maybe they should try paying attention to the kids that are already here," Eliza snapped. "What do you think is going to happen to us when they have their own children?" George shrugged his shoulders. "We'll have a bigger family, that's all. I suppose it might be a bit noisy at first." "Then you are as stupid as you look," Eliza blurted out. "They won't give a rat's ass about any of us once they have their own flesh and blood to fawn over." "That's ridiculous," George argued. "Why would they go through all the trouble of saving us and giving us a new life just to kick us out?" "Saving us?" Eliza snapped. "Is that what you think they did? We were better off where we were. All they did was make things worse." "What?" George asked. "How do you figure? Look around. We are free. I can see the moon and the stars. I can go for a walk when I want." "As long as you don't leave the property," Eliza barked. "Just because there are no walls doesn't mean it isn't a jail. Face it, we are confined here. They gave us a taste of freedom, then laughed in our faces, telling us we can never actually be completely free. Brody and Tails will never let us leave this place. At least Zeus was honest about raising us in captivity. He was helping us to explore our abilities so we could use them to forge a place in society for our kind, one where we don't have to hide." "That's crazy talk," George replied, a puff of smoke escaping with the words. One hand slapped over his lips, feeling the heat rising by the second. Beads of perspiration turned to a full sweat. Something wasn't right. Not even the moon's rays were cooling him back down. "I'm not crazy," Eliza replied. "It's the truth. I don't plan on waiting around to be replaced by a litter of little brats either. The first chance I get, I'm out of here. You could come with me." "Now who sounds stupid?" George snapped, stretching his neck. The raspy sound in his lungs returned. "You can't leave. It would put us all in danger." "Danger?" Eliza chuckled. "I'd be your only salvation. Mark my words. One day you'll thank me for taking a chance when no one else had the guts to do the same." "I need Brody and Tails," George spat out. Like you need a hole in the head, Eliza replied, glancing over at him. What's wrong with you? You look terrible. George licked his lips. Leaving a layer of what felt hotter than lava on his cracked lips rather than saliva didn't help. I don't feel well. Sweat sizzled on his skin, evaporating before even a single drop would fall. You're pale as a ghost, Eliza said, reaching out with one hand to feel his forehead. Don't touch me, George screamed, his eyes blazing with flames. He scooted a few feet away from her. I get it, Eliza complained. You only want Tails and Brody to tuck you in when you are sick. She huffed, hopping to her feet. I'll let them know. A red ponytail swayed from side to side as she headed back to the house.